So welcome everyone. Um, Welcome to this last session of the Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage Symposium. My name is Lena Dobrowolska and I am one of the coordinators of the Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage program alongside Teo and Phoebe, who I'm sure you met throughout this symposium. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this ninth session of this symposium on decolonizing climate coloniality and recentering marginalized voices and knowledges. And I would like to very warmly welcome our today's panelist, interdisciplinary scholar, speaker, and author, Dr. Farhana Sultana, architect, urban planner, scholar, and curator, Gabriela De Matos, and refugee and migration expert, founder and executive director of Climate Refugees, Amali Tower. Do you just want to all say hello very quickly?
Hi.
Hello, everyone. It's
Hi,
nice to be here with you all.
Likewise. Thanks for the invite and the honor and organizing.
Thank you so much all for joining us today. So in today's session, we will consider why, in the context of loss and damage and climate discourse, a fundamental rethink of how climate knowledge is created, shared, and applied is needed in favor of a paradigm that is centering the voices and expertise of those who have been mostly affected by climate change, even though contributed the least to the crisis, and are being denied the power to really shape the trajectory and the solutions. And these topics will be examined through the perspectives and expertise of our esteemed panelists, so Afro-Brazilian architecture, and that is approached through an intersectional framework of race, culture, and environmental justice that Gabriela brings, climate-induced migration and displacement that Amali brings, and the urgent need to decolonize the institutions that govern climate science and policy, and their epistemologies that Farhana written about in her work. Just a very quick intro to the program. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Ways of Repair engages with issues of climate-related loss and damage. It is part of the Loss and Damage Collaborations Art and Cultural Program and has been supported by the Open Societies Foundation. The program includes an online artistic research residency, and we welcomed Gabriela, Numbuso Matibele, and Sibonela Gumede, and Zara Malkani as artists in residence last year. We also commissioned critical texts that were developed by Alexis Pauline Gams, Dr. Farhana Sultana, and TJ Demos. And we also led a series of public events, all aimed at facilitating a transdisciplinary exchange on the loss and damage caused by the climate crisis. And you can find all of these outputs and recordings of previous events available on our website, waysofrepair.com. Just a very quick introduction to this symposium. This symposium marks the culmination of this program. It showcased the work developed by the artists and the critical thinkers. And again, please head to our website to see the archived sessions from the past 9 days. A very quick house rules. Before I properly introduce our speaker, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Please tell us where you are tuning in from today, and please feel free to share any thoughts on today's topics as we're having this conversation. Please note that you will be ejected from the sessions for any abusive comments. Do use the Q&A box anytime during the discussion to ask a question, and we will try to ask it as we develop the conversation. So we will not have a Q&A at the end. We'd like to sort of put the audience's questions throughout today's conversation. So please do use this box. And the session will be recorded, and the recording will be shared shortly after this event on our YouTube channel, as well as on the symposium webpage. So without further ado, please let me introduce today's speakers. Amali Tower, as I introduced briefly, is a refugee migration expert founder and executive director of Climate Refugees. Amali is a member of the World Economic Forum Expert Network in Migration, Human Rights and Humanitarian Responses, and the UC Berkeley Climate Refugees Working Group. She sits on the advisory board of the Center for Climate and Security in Washington, D.C. Gabriela De Matos is an architect, urban planner, scholar, and curator. Gabriela's background is in sustainability and management of the built environment. She was a co-president of the Brazilian Institute of Architects. She founded the Black Women Architects Project, which maps the production of Black Brazilian women architects, and is the author of the book Arquitectas Negras, Volume 1, which won the Institute of Architects of Brazil São Paulo Department Award for Best Architecture Publication. In 2023, Gabriela was the co-curator to the Brazilian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of Architecture that was awarded the Golden Lion for Best National Participation. And Farhana Sultana, Dr. Farhana Sultana is an interdisciplinary scholar, speaker, author who is broadly interested in nature, society, relationships, political ecology, climate justice, water governance, critical development studies, transnational feminist scholarship, human rights and citizenship, and decolonization of global systems. She is a professor of geography and the environment at Syracuse University, where she is also research director for environmental collaboration and conflicts in the program for the advancement of research on conflict and collaboration at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. She is the author of many books and scientific publication, and her most recent book, entitled Confronting Climate Coloniality, Decolonizing Pathways for Climate Justice, has just been released. So I invite you to have a look at that. Okay, so without further ado, I think I will open up the discussion. But just to say, please do visit our website to explore the digital restitutions of Gabriela Condoble Tejeiros, which provides insight into some of the research that she undertook in 2024 as part of this residency, as well as Farhana's text on decolonizing climate knowledge, repairing epistemic injustice and loss in the era of climate change. These are available on the website, as well as the link to Amali's work at climaterefugees.org will be posted in the chat. So also please have a look at that. Okay, that was a very long introduction, but all of you are incredibly accomplished and incredibly busy people. So I think it was really worth to amplify that and highlight this. And Amali, since we have heard from Farhana and Gabriela during last week's sessions, perhaps I would like to open up with you and ask you to reflect through the extensive work that you've done with refugees, migrants, and displaced persons on what recentering marginalized voices means to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lena. Thank you to Loss and Damage Collaboration, Ways of Repair, Farhana and Gabriela. I'm so delighted to share this time and this opportunity with you both. Fabulous work you're both doing. So I think, Lena, what you asked me was, what does it mean to me to center marginalized voices, right? Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm grateful that this is even a topic of conversation and consideration. And perhaps it's something that, especially the Global South and marginalized people have been saying for a very, very long time. I mean, honestly, it's not an expression, it's a reality. It's a lived reality for people of color. And I think there's a danger of it becoming tokenistic and just a conversation point, or a buzzword, the way localization might be a buzzword. So I want to sort of say right from the offset that since this is not new in terms of discussion, what I'd like to sort of focus on is, inclusion of marginalized voices where and for whom and to what end. So, some of the things that I think don't necessarily get amplified are the practical realities, and how and why people aren't included. It's not some accident, it's not something that happens out of context. I think for all of us who have any opportunity to influence the conversation, it's worth taking a minute to wonder, why are people excluded at all? And I think a lot of the reasons for that is to step back and wonder, is it just that those people are excluded, or is it also that the things that concern them are not part of the conversation? And to me, that is the greater challenge and problem that needs to be discussed and resolved. So what do I mean by that? Let's first take, why are people excluded from these climate spaces? Excuse me. So one, working in migration and refugee with any forcibly displaced population, but working primarily, with global South populations, it becomes apparently clear one of the fastest and most easy, I don't know about easy, but one of the most endemic ways in which people are excluded are they're not able to attend physically and be at the forums and various fora in which these conversations take place. And so what does that mean? It's not just that there are visa regimes and border restrictions that actually restrict people from coming. They're actually rooted in, I would say, neo-colonial policies. So if we want to decolonize, we have to actually look at how is colonialism extended today. Why are Bretton Woods institutions like the World Bank and the IMF actually still constructs of colonial policy and imperial power that extends to this day? I'm not an academic. These are not things that I work and study on, but these are my lived realities as a Sri Lankan and as someone who has been raised in both, West, North, South, if you will. From the minute you're born, these are very real things that you have to challenge. They're not things that we went to uni and first heard about. They're things we experienced because you see it in why is Sri Lanka, suffering in XYZ way, whereas where I was born in London does not have this impact. And it doesn't take very much to recognize that these are policies that are being lived out by billions of people. So if you can't come to the COP, it might be because you're not extended an invitation to the COP. So that is something that we as actors and advocates need to be challenging, and not just when we're at the SBs and COPs. We need to be working on it all year long. That means it needs to be part of your funding considerations. It needs to be part of your advocacy behind the scenes with powerful actors. It needs to be part of your outward-facing conversation that states need to actually adopt their border restrictions to actually allow people to be present. The second thing is if you're not present, not only are you not actually conversing, you're not actually getting an opportunity to influence what should be discussed. So everything I've just said about why can't I be here doesn't become a conversation. It just becomes kind of a footnote that I see a couple of tweets about, at every climate conference, and then we all forget about it for a while. Why are people, having to work for free and depend on powerful actors who really don't always have this issue of, no funding to even pay for its staff and no capacity? Why do they have to work in such collaborative ways to even get their work presented? So then there are other ways in which the topic is not shaped, coming from migration, climate, refugees. It's amazing how much the conversation is, what terminology? Are they refugees? Are they migrants? Are they IDPs? What should we be using? And you'll note that the people who are channeling those conversations, not that they're not important, tend to be people who don't actually have any experience with displacement. So they're driving the conversation. And then is that the conversation? Doesn't even become a point of discussion, because we're not actually bringing marginalized, displaced people to even bear on what is it that you'd like to talk about. And I think the most stark example I'd be remiss to not mention is the almost complete lack of discussion in the climate community on Gaza. You know, it's been 15 months and I'm still waiting for the outrage. I'm still waiting for the climate community to say, you know, these are all the same justice issues that we're all fighting on. So when I go back to what I said about funding, ask yourself, how much is funding a constraint for both global North and global South actors to actually live out your values, to live by your principles, maybe your declared mission and vision statements for your organization? How many people have actually paid an actual price of having their funding revoked, or being silenced, or gaslighted, or ghosted, as the kids might say? You know, you won't even know. So I think I've said a lot. You know, I just kind of wanted to lay the landscape, if you will, about it's not just inclusion of people in a tokenistic way. It's actually about ensuring full and engaging and meaningful participation in a sustainable way. I'll leave it there. Thanks. I look forward to more.
Thanks, Amali, for kicking us off. We're going right to the heart of the myriad of sort of problems, entangled problems. Farhana and Gabriela, do you want to come on sort of following on that? How does sort of this, how do you see this recentering, and in this wider context, recentering of voices, marginalized communities, in this wider context of decolonization, and how have you been pursuing it in your own respective practices? What does it mean to you?
Go ahead, Gabriela, I can go after you.
Okay, thank you. First, I think Amali says all. I don't know what
to add.
Yes, because this is the main core of the situation, because as I'm Brazilian and I'm also dealing with the fact that our traditional communities that used to protect our environment, they are also hopeless to be part of these discussions, and they are always put behind this. So I think we need, as a person from the global South, of course, I do think we have to be in that spaces also, but we can organize ourselves as we've been doing historically to protect the knowledge that we have, and also create our own tools to cross these barriers. So I think we have like two ways to do. We have to, of course, always talk about this, say that we have to be represented in these huge forums and everything, but we can't just wait so these people will like look to us, because this is not an issue to look to this place. This is like planned to happen this way, like making these people not participate in this in the discussion. So, but otherwise, in the other hand, we are like victims of this also of this climate change. As we are victims of colonialism, capitalism, and everything. So I'm more interested in be with these people and talk to them, listen to them, and try to build other tools, as I said, to cross this barrier. I think I just added this.
Well, thank you, Lena, for that question. So part of the work that I've been doing and the talk that I gave last Wednesday, exactly a week ago, was entirely on this. What does it mean to recenter, and how do we do so? So folks can certainly go read that work. It's a small glimpse into a wider body of work, but I'll just point out that to recenter is often tokenistic, but it also means how do we change it? It is our strategies, it is other people's strategies. But I think one of the things that I've been working on is with you, if you are a marginalized or excluded person, and most marginalized and excluded communities have been rallying and calling for inclusion, sharing their ideas, but they often fall on deaf ears. So my strategy is how do you work on the powerful so that they can hear, they can learn, they can listen. So it's the skill of deep listening. So it is flipping the narrative instead of saying, how do we empower people to have a voice? People never lost their voice. They just went unheard. People have always had their voice. And voice is never given, right? Power is taken, but voice always exists. So, for instance, one of the iconic images that I shared in my talk last Wednesday, and that's in my text on the Ways of Repair website, is that picture that forms our background. So that is Dr. Salim ul Haq from Bangladesh. He was my lifelong mentor. I was his student intern. I'm from Bangladesh, so I've known him almost my entire adult life. And we had an op-ed in press with Guardian when he passed away in late October of 2023. So, but that was one of the COPs he attended. That was COP26 in Scotland, and you can see the room is empty. So how do we, instead of giving space to people who are there, who have managed to find funding, accreditation, their mic not being cut off and all of those issues, but then how do we get people to attend and to hear? That's the challenge, right? So why is that room empty? So these are these questions of, is it about scheduling? It is about intentional exclusion from when the audience is likely to be there. But when people are there, what are the ways we can encourage communities of power that it is in your best interest to learn? It is a privilege to learn from these wide variety of voices, because if we're going to map out much more robust convivial pathways, certainly not the way America has gone this last week or even in the last year and a half, the way, excuse me, that Amali was mentioning about the silence over Gaza. Although many of us in the climate community were making such noises, we actually faced further forms of silencing, right? So there's issues, context, politics, geopolitics, but if we're going to talk about in more neutral terms, these COP territories or other forms of bilateral meetings or meetings of like-minded communities, how do we get people to hear and listen? I think that's one of the most important things that we can do, and that's been one of the kind of touchstones that I'm focusing on.
I just wanted to follow up from all these extremely important and huge points that all of you put forward. A question around, these marginalized, for whom and by whom. And while we're speaking about recentering, why don't we speak about decentering? And because it's obvious that, for these voices that obviously are marginalized through, historic and current perpetuation of violences and inequalities, have been very much central to all of your practices and all of your work. So I would like to flip the focus and ask you who, and you've already started to speak about this, but maybe there is a nuance of who and what and how continues to reproduce marginalization of these groups and voices and people in your respective context. So that could be, in urban planning, for example, when we see more and more participatory inclusion, and yet the outcomes are very much disserving the communities. Gabriela, and you've been sort of speaking about it with the examples of Tejeros, and on one hand, it being, being considered now protected, but what's the future of these sanctuaries? And similarly for you, Farhana and Amali, in policy spaces and knowledge production spaces. And I would like to adjacent that to the question that came up for Amali specifically at the Q&A. Amali, do you think people with power can use the narrative of centering marginalized voices to avoid the responsibility of dismantling harmful systems that they perpetuate? He's given an example of the work of Daniel Krugman in Global Health that insists powerful actors can and should leverage the power to engage in anti-colonial struggle.
Do you want me to jump in, Lena, then, with my reflection on that question? Yeah, I think I got the gist of that. In my experience, and it's not like I'm really going looking for this because it would be too disheartening if I spent all my time looking and hunting to see what are good and bad examples of centering marginalized voices. But what has come up to the surface for me are quite bad examples. And I don't think that they're necessarily malevolent, or I just think that there's a lack of understanding because there isn't an experience, a lived experience for people in so-called power, right? Or our allies even. I often find myself even having conversations with allies where you're sort of paused going, wow, did you not get the heart of the matter? And maybe you can't, so that's something I have to personally contend with. But I was gonna say, and it helps me sort of reflect on what Farhana was saying about like reframing, right? Like it's not so much about how do you make the powerful listen. I think if we don't actually have maybe like the elephant in the room conversation of, there's a massive problem of othering people. Marginalized people are othered.
Yeah.
I would say to everybody listening, and I really if you're in a position of power and if you're tuning in from the global north, you are, whether you yourself are a marginalized person or not, i.e. me, I'm still in a place that can leverage power in a way that, my fellow Sri Lankans in Sri Lanka may not be able to. So consider, how much othering and quite frankly, racism plays a role in every minute and major decision that then plays out to why is Salim speaking to an empty audience at COP26? Because these are the realities. We don't need to go super highfalutin and like do a PhD on how do we deconstruct these things. You know the answers because you're living them every day. You see them in your society. You see what are the intricate ways in which we other people along strata of race, economics, geography. It doesn't matter. We find new ways to classify, to dehumanize, and to treat people in undignified ways. And that's what I mean by like, here are my practical ways of like, don't wait till it's September and go, hey, who are we going to bring to COP? And and have no concept in your life every day of, do you know what it takes to get accredited? Do you know what it takes to not have an operational budget? Do you know what it's like to do this work because you have to, because you don't know any other way to survive? This is not a job to people. This is an actual crisis at their footstep, So think about, like, really deconstruct the way you're thinking and you're working. And, and so what does that look like? Embrace and collaborate with people on an ongoing basis, not in this sort of like crisis mode, where, oh, we have a small grant, we can throw a few $100s at somebody, and you feel good about yourself. Think about what is it like to not have any stability, to not know whether you're going to be able to go, to not know whether the work that you've been doing is actually even going to come up at the COP because you may not be there. You're not in all the preparatory meetings and rooms either. I could go on and on and on, but I just think if I'm going to get up at 8 in the morning and get on this webinar, I'm going to tell you from my heart, you know, what I see in terms of how we other people. The goal shouldn't be to make sure an Indigenous person comes in all their ceremonial garb and sits on a panel for 45 minutes and is given 5 minutes to speak. That's not the goal. The goal should be to ask, why is this person, why is it such a huge deal and so many months, and why are we making a press statement about the fact that this person is even here when they should have always been there? That's the conversation. You know, the conversation should be, why are people gatekeeping opportunities? And it's not just politicians, it's everybody. So deconstruct is to decolonize, in my mind.
Farhana, would you like to come next? We do it in reverse order this time.
All right, so this is a complex question because when we think about marginalized, you know, for whom and by whom, and also where, I think one of the things that I really think is important is to challenge those structural and systemic issues that maintain that colonial matrix of power. That's what enduring coloniality is. We might live in a post-colonial world, or where even though there's settler colonialism and occupation, people assume that, well, we have independent nation states, colonization ended. It did not. Right, so coloniality, that, you know, is perhaps more academic, but I think it makes intuitive sense, is how it seeps into everything else, how it seeps into power and voice and institutions and trade rules, and in terms of media coverage, right, in terms of what gets attention and what doesn't. So if we think about those types of shifts that are needed, we need to therefore chip away and dismantle this matrix of power, because that's what's kind of undergirding this, right? It's maintaining the systems that reproduce these otherings and exclusions and marginalizations and silencing in multiple contexts. So it's not just we chip away at one, we gain some leverage and footing it through the door, and then we create opportunities for more. So it's about creating this elbow room. And it is about creating these systemic and structural changes. And, you know, the thing about change is that it feels impossible. It won't happen until it suddenly does. And then you realize it's come from a long-standing collectivized or solidarity-based work that's multi-pronged from multiple spaces and multiple ways. And it's not uniform in the sense that it is not, let's say, just through activism. It isn't just through academia. It isn't just through media. It's all of them all the time, all at once. And that's how you start to shift systems and bring about change. Of course, charismatic leadership helps, but I think we need to build a lot of charismatic leaders instead of rely on one. So that's the kind of way I'm thinking about in terms of how do we flip these things on their head. So instead of just worrying about recentering of the marginalized, and because it's often tokenistic. So instead of having, and this is part of what comes up in a lot of conversations around decolonization forever, is that it is not just having a seat at the table, but it is burning the table down and reconstructing a new one. And that what that means is having a say in the process, having a say in what gets counted and what is part of the agenda and is part of decision making. So it is not just, showing up for a 45-minute panel and having a 5-minute opportunity to speak, right? So it is about determining who gets to speak and all these things. And it's not just a one-time thing. It has to be multiple times, all the time, in multiple ways. And part of that is why I really do stress that those with relational privilege have to pause and figure out what are the ways that they're enrolled in this, that, we're always already enrolled in this, we're complicit in these, and what are the ways that we can intervene from where we are with what we have. I think I'll leave it at that, because these are wider structural systemic issues that really, but need to be challenged, because to create space for those who who have historically not been heeded or heard means that those who have been the 800-pound gorillas have to not be, taking up all the oxygen in the room. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, just to add a little bit in the conversation, I think a few years ago, I get this notion that to build other center, it is still think always connected to the idea of colonization. So what I've been learning with Black communities that I work in indigenous community in Brazil is that this idea that only a person or only an experience can talk about everybody, it's a wrong idea. So Black people from Terreiros de Candomblé in Bahia, they said that we have to embrace the idea of diversity. So otherwise we can live in the world. So diversity is everything, by human, non-human, people in the center, people in the borders. So this is from the start. And then we should think about some dynamics that can't bring this diversity to the table. So Brazil is a country with 200 million people. We can't have just one indigenous people from the north and one Black person from the south to have this 5 minutes in an event like copy. That's why people don't think that this kind of event is going to bring something for us. We have to create our own forums and create other things that represent us, and because of this diversity. I think in Brazil, we have, in this kind of event, this is very interesting, because when we have something to discuss on Terreiro, you will invite all the community to be there. Sometimes it's 200-300 people, a lot of people, because yes, we have a lot of people in Brazil all the time in all of events. So if you have an event, you are going to bring these people, and then you are going to have some moments to connect more and more with the subject that is going to be discussed. So it's not, we don't have a chance to think in 5 minutes to do this. So in Brazil, we're going to have this COP this year. And I try to connect with people from communities that are there, or people in the government, federal government, and we doesn't have any news about how this is planning, or what people we will have there, what kinds of ideas they are bringing there. So I think the more important for me is that I started to change, to shift this consciousness, colonized mind that we have in these countries that were colonized. When I started to read people from my own land, when I started to read people and reference what I've been doing and writing and everything in these people. So this is a important thing to think about, I think.
Thank you for bringing this up, Gabriela. I was just about to ask about the role of Terreiros and about the work that you've been doing around creating spaces and institutions and centering this knowledge in a for and with the people. So thank you for elaborating on that. There's been lots of things, really dense, incredible reflections in the chat. There's been also a question here in the chat. Can you all see the Q&A? Do you want to take this question? Does anyone want to specifically speak to this question on the panel?
I'm happy to, because I'm sure this is a reflection on what I was saying about othering. So the question about, which everyone can read, how do we move beyond othering? And then using Rishi Sunak, we could say Priti Patel as an example of very anti-migrant xenophobic policies. I would just simply say the work, this conversation is about going beyond the construct of just race as color. Racism and othering are systems of power. It's about identifying, challenging, and deconstructing the systems of power. That's the problem. That is why you have, in the United States, the president election, you will see people of color voted for things that don't necessarily work in their own interests and favor or for their people. This is not a new construct. This is a historical reality. This is a present reality. And this is what happens when you recognize that mobility, regardless of whether you are white or not, is only attained through entering the system of power, which has been created by colonial and empirical forces, which continue to this day. So unfortunately, yes, there are a lot of people who end up being rather self-interested, or maybe they genuinely think that this is how you make the world better. I couldn't disagree more, but that's not the point. The point of the work is to recognize the reason why someone who may look like you doesn't necessarily reflect the values that you're working with or believe in, is because they're entering the very system of power that we should be trying to dismantle. So it's just well beyond color.
Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of segue from this to a little bit more of a technical question, around loss and damage framing, which again, it's a kind of a policy manifestation, I think, of a lot of these, climate coloniality underpinnings that we've been, trying to put our finger on. And my question is, through the last week, we have heard both TJ Demos and Dr. Farhana, kind of critically unpacking this narrow framing of loss and damage that takes the really technocratic and monetized approach to addressing loss and damage, leaving out the entanglement of climate crisis with coloniality, with other forms of violences, and how do we actually account for the erasure of ways of knowing, sense of place, ways of being, and also then impacting the types of climate solutions being put forward. So, and also following on that, because that's kind of plain knowledge at this stage, we could also argue that this narrow framing is reflective of the current political impossibility of reparations, especially if we acknowledge that under UNFCCC, owing the highly contentious nature of any discussion about finance and other forms of support to address climate harm, which have been repeatedly blocked by the countries most responsible for climate crisis, such as US at the forefront, the mere terminology loss and damage is stand-in for compensation and liability. Therefore, my question is, what conditions are needed to expand, this framing of loss and damage under and outside of UNFCCC, and how to ensure more transformative approaches to solutions to loss and damage?
I mean, I can just start off by just sharing just some thoughts off the top of my head. So it has been largely technocratic, economic, or physical loss and damage, because it had to start somewhere, right? So I believe that was not a bad way to start. That was a way to give concrete accounting of damage and reparations needed, about financing, about addressing issues. But I think one of the things is, given the current situation, the current geopolitical climate we're in, with climate financing being struck off or shrinking even further, or dues not coming forward, a lot of words, but empty purses. This is where I think that where my work was, at least in my text, in terms of thinking more expansively. What are the other ways we can approach this so that we can think about shifting those forms of kind of narratives, and also to widen our understanding? So it is about the epistemic loss and damage, how that ends up creating certain kinds of impoverishment in knowledge production around science, around climate, in discussions around climate science or climate change and so on. One of the issues is, if there isn't financing for it, how do you create conditions of possibility, right? What are the other ways that you can try to halt the loss and damages so you don't need the financing, which is that then we bump into mitigation and adaptation. But in terms of thinking kind of in a parallel way, which is the way I was approaching it, that if we can educate and train more and more people to understand these issues, we might have a hope that in a few years we will have more climate communicators, educators, negotiators, powerful people who have a better understanding. But at the same time, I know the caveat that we've had famous, powerful people who are very well read, who've read everything from Edward Said to Frantz Fanon to Paulo Freire, but they haven't really been able to do much because of the systems and structures that constrain them. So this is where I keep coming back to that multi-pronged approach. Perhaps it's because I'm an educator and a scholar activist and somebody who works in policy spaces. I see that the only way we move the needle forward is by having continual re-education of people, of ourselves, of that, going back to what many African anti-colonial scholars have talked about in terms of decolonizing the mind, the self, the community, more expansively in terms of more reimagining convivial futures, pursuing different pathways and methods, and then sharing that outwards. So, what Gabriela was saying, and I noticed that in the comments somebody mentioned Fred Moten's undercommons. So yeah, so there's lots of different scholars who give us the vocabulary and the tools with which to think. So that's a question of how do we then use it in different ways to move these needles forward so that we can create conditions of possibility of the financing that is owed, that is due. And this is not philanthropy, this is accountability, right? So it needs to be understood that way, that it's not charity, it is an obligation. It is literally, you broke it, you pay for it, you fix it. So I'll leave it at that.
Amali or Gabriela, would you like to add anything to this point?
No, I don't. I think Dr. Farhana said everything. I totally agree.
Yeah, me too. I'll just only add an example like that is an actual experience I've had. I always fight for, so, and it goes back to what Farhana was saying about, and I've been saying about challenging power. So, for example, when we're trying to inform the Loss and Damage Board, I find it very helpful and also grounding to constantly ask myself, is my job, is my value add, is the most important or contribution I can make to parrot back the terminology, the flawed terminology, and fit my work into their very narrow construct? Or is it my value add to try and expand the mind with things that aren't welcomed or even thought of or conceived of at this point? And that's why I said in the very beginning, I don't want to participate in this conversation of, is it refugee, is it IDP, is it migrant? To the person displaced, it doesn't make a hill of beans difference what you want to call me. So I think that that's the type of thinking that we should bring into these spaces and try and, resist, whether it's a policymaker, a negotiator, or a colleague, from limiting not just the conversation, but limiting the expanse of the conversation. And this is what I mean by it is every day doing decolonizing thinking, which will eventually become decolonizing work. Let me say something even better. Very lastly, a Sudanese refugee, Deng Dak Maluel, who's a fantastic person, who was a lost boy from Sudan, who's trying to do what he can to help his fellow Sudanese and refugees in Kakuma in Kenya. He said to me, and he's the only person I have ever used a name to quote in any of my reports because Deng said, use my name. He said, Amali, as a lost boy of Sudan, as a child who was separated from their family, told me his whole story. And then he said, you know what? It is better to be fleeing war than climate change. Because at least in war, I can get to a place, I can get to aid, I'll probably know what I'm going to eat, I'll probably have access to water. If you're trying to flee climate change, when you're hungry, there's no food. And I'm paraphrasing Deng. You can go to our work and read his actual words. When you're thirsty, there's no water to drink. And he went on to say, and for me, what I heard from that is, do you really think I care? Whether it's refugee or migrant or climate refugee, this is someone who fled war as a lost boy of Sudan many, many, many years ago, and is now saying how much he's seeing the effects of climate change in a camp that he has called home almost his entire life as being even worse. Now, I'm not trying to negate the effects of war, but I'm trying to point out how our very narrow framings and definitions and the conversation that powerful people want us to have is extremely limiting and a disservice to the people who need us to be much better advocates.
Thank you so much, Amali. Are the panelists happy to run over by 3 to 4 minutes? Because there are quite a few questions in the chat, which I think are really great questions. One is about the using of the oppressor's language in decolonial discussions, in discussions around recentering marginalized voices. Mainly this person, Alexandra, is asking about using English. I think that it is a really important point, and it would be great to hear your thoughts about that, but also, and you've talked about it already, but besides that, are there any other exclusionary practices that you keep seeing that are stopping people from meaningful participation? You did mention quite a few, but if there's anything particularly relating to perhaps language, and that is both, jargonization and all these dimensions as well, that maybe you'd like to speak to in relation to this question. Gabriela, also, if you're happy to respond to that question, then please do come on.
Well, I think a huge thing for us in Brazil, in South America, most specific in Brazil, because we are the most bigger country in South America, but we also are the only country that speaks Portuguese. So this is a thing that we have, and it's a problem. And on the other hand, we have a problem with language because these spaces, the official language is always English. So this is a problem in the meaning that we have this struggle to communicate in this space and also to be comfortable in this space, but also in the other perspective, you people that speak English also have a problem because you don't access what our thinkers are saying for ages in our country, because it's in Portuguese or indigenous language. So the thing that I don't see that it's often put in perspective in this kind of reflections that we do about decolonization is about language. It's about English, the way that we can communicate in these spaces.
I want to add to what Gabriela said and a couple of the comments in the Q&A box. Well, English has become lingua franca, so we don't have a choice if we want to communicate across the world, but to speak it. But we can also have simultaneous translation services. So if I were to suddenly start talking to you in Bengali, like right now, আপনি কি আমার কথা বুঝতে পারতেছেন? না, বুঝতে পারতেছেন না. Right? So you will not understand what I just said unless you had Google Translate at hand. So I have to speak in the colonizer's language, but that does not mean that is the only language I operate in. Right? So we work in the streets, we work in communities, we work with artists and artisans and fisher folk and farmer folk in the languages that we can work with and in the communities that we have the right to be in. We cannot just barge in and extract knowledge because that is a very colonial practice. So part of this is that matrix of power that we all operate under, but at the same time, why I insist on decolonizing education is because it gives us this awareness, gives us these tools, teaches us that, okay, I need to go read something in another language, or I need to find a translation that's actually accurate into the language I understand. There's only so many languages I can learn. I'm not very good with too many languages. So, so it is about different communities. It is about speaking in different voices in terms of different communities, reducing the jargon, doing the translation work ourselves, and building those bridges, building those alliances, those bridges. So for instance, many people who've attended my talks ask me, why do I keep quoting certain very radical, anti-colonial, not scholars, but doers, right? Like Brazilian Paulo Freire, or, I'm from Africa, but although actually from Martinique, Frantz Fanon, or, Antonio Gramsci from Italy, or other scholars, because those are the works that help me understand the world. But that's just some of them. And I mentioned them because others will have heard of them. But if I turn around and say, well, have you heard of Qazi Nazrul Islam? Probably not. Right? But, some of the points that, Amali raised and Gabriela raised, it shows up in the book that Lena was talking about in terms of, my book that came out just a couple of months ago. And it starts with a poem by Qazi Nazrul Islam. But I had to translate it into English, but I insisted the publisher write it out in Bengali first. So these are the kind of, so you can be subversive, disruptive, you can create that elbow room. And that is how we start to bring about change, because wholesale change is harder until it isn't. But it isn't hard when a lot of people are involved. None of us can do this on our own. So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, I totally agree with you. But the idea of loss and damage is in English. So the point is, we are not just translating this to Portuguese, so people will connect with the idea of loss and damage because it was built in English. That's my point. It's not, of course, we should be there. We can talk in English, but the whole idea is in English. So my point is in this specific dimension of language, the kind of things that is thinking English, and we have to pursue this, not just translate to Portuguese. We are pursuing the idea.
Can I just quickly add that we don't have to just actually speak, we can draw, there's the arts. So we don't have to use language and translation as a barrier to keep people out. And let's not forget how much language is an extension of education and knowledge for a lot of people. So you might be literate, but maybe you don't, which, you know, and I think you have plenty of knowledge and education, but maybe the person who has something to offer doesn't feel worthy of being in this space because they don't have lauded degrees, but maybe they really excel in the artistic ways of speaking. There are various forms of intellect. And imagine, instead of a panel of us all speaking and making sure that an Indigenous person has 5 minutes to be on the panel as well, we just ceded space and time and said, hey, what do you want to say and how do you want to say it? And maybe something theatrical comes forth for an hour. And maybe all of a sudden a jaded policymaker is like, what's going on over there? I hear a lot of music. You know, maybe this is how you reframe and also balance these tipping points.
Yes, but it's still our rich conversation here is in English. So it's recorded and it is an archive that is going to be in English just for people who speaks English. In my country, 200 million people, just 1% of the population speaks English. English is just for rich people. So colonialism still is in this idea of has just one official language to speak. So it's just this point.
You're right, Gabriela. And we have plenty of people on the call who could get to work on decolonizing work right now, write a grant, find a way to get this translated and into the ears and eyes and hands of so many people. That is allyship.
Thank you so much. Dziękuję bardzo za wasze myśli. That's in my language, Polish. Thank you so much for all the sharing and all these thoughts. And I completely agree. We should be just introducing and blending all these other knowledges. They should be called other, you know, as well. The multiplicity of, you know, knowledges and languages, and we should be doing it all sort of instinctually, like you were proposing, despite of these hard cut frames and systems that we're finding ourselves in. But it was just so refreshing to really hear you speak about, you know, these kind of implicit, invisible aspects of coloniality that entangle us all the time and we participate in. There are so many questions still in the chat and so many reflections in the chat, but we have run over quite a bit and I wouldn't want to take any more time from your day because I know you're all very, very busy. But I just wanted to end on, rather than have a wrap up sort of question, maybe ask you to pose a question or to leave the audience with a question or with a thought from this conversation. Or with a wish.
Okay, I'll start. Maybe it's the teacher in me, the perpetual educator. What are you going to do about it? What is everybody who's listening now or in the future, or in another time and place? What can you do with what you have from where you are today? And how can you do it better tomorrow? That's what I tell my students every semester, every class. What are the little things can you do? Can you do the translation work? Can you write a grant? Can you perhaps work with another community? Can you do the bridging work, right? What can we all do? We cannot just be consumers of knowledge and be told what to do. We have to learn our own ways. What are the ways? Can you read differently? Can you read other texts? Can you listen to other, messaging? Can you witness other art? Or, can you reframe, for instance, how do we understand what is ecocide, right? What are the ways? And then can you then teach somebody else? Go talk to somebody else. The best thing you can do about climate and loss and damage is keep talking about it. Go talk to friends and family and neighbors, and that's something you can do. So what are you going to do about it? So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhana. Amali and Gabriela, do you have anything coming to your mind?
Amali, you can go first.
I was gonna say that to you. I think Farhana, like, ditto, spot on, brilliant. Yeah, exactly. So I think all that I can add to that is maybe the next layer to also keep in mind, you know, what emotional and mental energy do you have to help relieve the enormous burden that so many are carrying. Because I'll say it again. It might look like, oh, look at these three very accomplished people, you know, who are doing. They're probably running on fumes. They're probably not funded or underfunded. They're probably wondering how they're also going to pay their bills. And I'm not trying to like talk about us. I'm saying we are representatives of millions of people that are doing this work with no support. So keep that in mind as well. You know, that you all know the statistics. There's a reason why there's it's not just that we've struck off climate in the decisions and the outcomes. That all trickles downhill. There's no funding to sustain and do the work. And so if you're living loss and damage and you're not funded to do it and you're not welcomed or invited into these spaces, you know, all of that is a result of colonial constructs. So if you're a practitioner, an actor, an activist in this space, carry that with you, because that's the burden that you should all be feeling and think, so how do I rebalance that? How do I not perpetuate that? And just think about what that's like for someone. So I think that's what I'll add to what Farhana said, because brilliant. Thank you.
I also think it was a beautiful way to end this section. If I can add something, I would say that when you're going to learn something in other places that are not your places, you should go and hear everything. Don't ever think that you will be a saver or anything like this. Just learn, listen to the elders, and then you go again and listen again, and then maybe one day you can add something that you think in the group it's going to be good for everybody. So I think I will add this.
And can I just end by
And
saying
thank you.
that
Thank you.
what a privilege this space has been that's been curated by Teo Lena and Phoebe Lynn, and the funding from Open Foundations, because it allowed these kinds of conversations over the last year. It allowed these collaborations. It started last January. I remember, I think on the same date, last January, it was me and Harjeet Singh doing this kind of a talk that kickstarted a lot of these things. And I just want to say that it has been such a luxury to learn from and be with, and then to marinate in these ideas and artwork and, you know, art history and so on, and texts. And I would really strongly invite those folks who are still here on the Zoom call, or those who are watching and listening in the future on the recording, check out the website and look at the different videos, look at the different art installations, look at the different texts, and just recognize that to have the space to have these kinds of conversations is rare. And I really thank the folks who made it happen. And I hope we can have this more in the future. And I'm really sad that this is the last of the 9 for this year. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. And this program just wouldn't be what it is without all of you coming together and being here today and throughout the year. So we are so ever grateful. And thank you for this honest and very generous discussion and heartwarming discussion and thoughtful discussion and heart-feeding discussion. This has been the final session of Ways of Repair, Loss and Damage Symposium. We would like to thank you so much. I'd like to thank the participants. Thank you for being so open and generous in the chat and with your questions. And we're really sorry we couldn't take more. We'd like to thank Open Societies Foundations and the Loss and Damage Collaboration, Erin, Hyacinthe, all the core team and the extended network for generous support, for participation, for making this symposium possible. We hope that you have found the knowledge gathered and shared useful for your work and thinking on, through, and with loss and damage. For those who wish to revisit sessions, as I said, and Farhana also said, everything is the place to visit is our website. And although this is the last of our program activities, we hope to be able to continue the ways of repair in one way or another in coming year. And in the meantime, please sign up to our mailing list to stay informed. And I just wanted to say farewell with the ever amazing words of Farhana. Let's create new solidarities to sharing and to be heard and to building kinships and alliances. Thank you all so much.